And then I did another post and I went to bed and I woke up in the morning and I just had so many texts from people. They were like, oh my gosh, I didn't know you were an influencer. Why are you on my TikTok feed right now or my For You page? And I was like, what are they talking about? And then I opened my phone and I was like, oh my gosh, like this one post now, 1 million people have seen it, 2 million people have seen it. I'm getting followers every second. And over the course of like a week, I went to like 20,000 followers, 30,000 followers, going to like towards 50,000 followers.
Hey there, and thanks for listening to the Beyond These Clinic Walls podcast. I'm your host, Julia, a PT turned product professional, joined by my delightful partner in crime co-hosts, Emma.
This is my tribe. This is how I think.
And Emily.
That is the best getting into PT story I've ever heard.
Founders of the Clinician Transition. Each episode, we interview former rehab professionals who have leveraged their clinical skills into non-traditional roles. I invite you to come hear the journeys, follow the career paths, and learn about the opportunities beyond these clinic walls. On today's episode of Beyond These Clinic Walls, we are joined by Alexander Stone. Alex is a doctor of physical therapy and clinical content program manager who works in digital health. As a clinician passionate about tech, Alex aims to improve patient care through innovative alternatives to traditional healthcare models, while empowering clinicians to deliver exceptional care. He owns and operates Stone Health, a freelance agency that provides consulting and content production services for a variety of clients in the healthcare space. He has a passion for education and specializes in creating content for digital health programs, educational platforms, websites, and social media. In today's episode, we deep dive into Alex's career and his journey into becoming a content creator. Next week, Alex returns with an engaging, awesome show and tell, walking us through his step-by-step guide into making your first 10K as a digital freelancer. You do not want to miss it. So stay tuned, and as always, happy listening. Alex, welcome to Beyond These Clinic Walls. Thank you for being on our show today. We're really excited to have you here.
Thanks for having me. Really excited to be with you.
Yeah. My first question I ask all of our guests is the high-level question. Tell me about yourself question. So at a high level, can you give our listeners who are not familiar with you a little overview of your career story?
Sure. Well, my name's Alex, for those of you who don't know. And I got my start some time ago when I went to college. A funny thing about me, I actually was a homeschooled kid. And I was homeschooled all up until the time I went to college. And that was a really exciting time for me. I'd never been in a classroom before, had never had to wait in line for anything before. So a lot of new stuff. And I had this amazing Anatomy 100 professor who got me really excited about not just healthcare, but teaching. And I thought that was a really cool combination of skills that I could continue to develop, because initially I wanted to go to school to be a musician. So it was a really interesting pivot for me. I actually started practicing in orthopedics once I got out of school. And like a lot of people, cut my teeth working with a lot of different patients from a lot of different backgrounds. Pretty early on, realized that I was interested in something different. And that's how I got into social media, which led to becoming a social media influencer, getting really involved in creating a lot of video content, a lot of written content to educate people and help them in a way that was a little bit different from what I was doing in the clinic for some years. And eventually that led me to what I do now, which it was clinical content management and now clinical program management. So it's been a really interesting ride getting to this point from where I started. And I think overall, even though I'm not in the clinic anymore, I'm really driven by a passion for helping people and educating them and really encouraging them to live better lives through information.
That's awesome. There's a few curveballs in there I didn't expect, like the musician. What kind of musician were you looking to be?
Yeah, at the time, I was a percussionist. I played drum set. I was in a couple different bands. I took a lot of different music theory courses and piano, and it was really hard. And all of a sudden, I realized, oh shoot, healthcare is actually really cool too. And that took me way off that path really fast.
Yeah. That's so cool. You mentioned your anatomy professor being thought of inspiration for you. Was there anything that they did as a teacher that really resonated with you that maybe you carry today when you're developing content and teaching?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. I'd say there were probably two big elements of that. The first was how I met that professor in my Anatomy 100 course. The way he came into it was actually, we had a professor already, and it was the start of the quarter. And this person was one of the worst teachers I'd ever had. And we kind of stumbled through the first 2 weeks as a class. We all did terribly, didn't learn anything, pretty much all failed our first exam. And then, wouldn't you know it, that professor actually just stopped showing up, maybe like had a cold or something and just didn't show up for a week. So after that, they fired that teacher and brought in this other guy out of the blue, and he ended up just being incredible. So by comparison, it was really great to see an example of what's maybe not a great teacher and then immediately have someone come in and be the antithesis of that. But also what really struck me about his teaching style was that he always focused on the big picture and essentially the big marbles in the jar. Because if you understand the big stuff, then the small stuff comes a lot easier. I know we've all seen that, putting the big ones first and then the little ones. And that has just stuck with me ever since. If you can get people hooked on the big stuff, then they're going to be more interested and able to handle the little stuff.
Yeah, that's so cool. I have a question for homeschooling. Was it like led by your parents, or did you have teachers that directed your homeschooling?
Yeah, kind of interesting. I was the only purebred homeschooled student in my family, meaning I didn't do anything outside of the home in terms of education. However, like my siblings, they either were homeschooled for a while and then they went to public school or high school. Had another, one of my brothers went to alternative learning center where it was more of like a co-op situation. I was taught by essentially my mother until I got to kind of like junior high age. And that was right around the time when online learning started becoming a thing. And from there on, I learned from these super rudimentary online websites for learning and took tests on there. And then I actually, instead of going all the way through, I actually started college when I was 16, which was another kind of quirky thing.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, if you hadn't had any other experience with teachers, and then this first teacher is this terrible anatomy teacher, you're like, what is going on? I should have stuck with the homeschooling for this part too. I think what I'm learning from a lot of people that I've talked to, some people have had these experiences where they end up in a spot that is perfect for them based off all their past experiences, but never thought that they would be at that spot. And I feel like throughout the course of your career journey, even just starting right there where you're saying at the start of these beginning online classes, you were a student in them. At the very beginning of content delivery being online, you were being the student and had that experience. And I feel like that was probably some of your initial experience into content delivery and learning and education through that medium. I feel like that just makes it perfect for your career journey and what you're kind of doing today.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there have been, and maybe many of us have experienced this, but having those moments where we get to work with a new technology for the first time or do something different from what we're used to, anything like that can really just drive you into a completely different place in life. And I'd never thought about it before, but it's totally possible that from that moment, I was like, I'm going to work in tech. This is it. And it was an unconscious motive until way later in life. So that's pretty funny.
That's so cool. I do have maybe a side question. So you became a social media influencer. How do you define social media influencer?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I have to admit, at the time, I had to look it up because I asked my fiance, I was like, babe, am I a social media influencer? And she was like, oh, yeah, totally, you are. And I was like, what do you mean? And she was like, oh, it's anybody who has over 10,000 followers. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. And I looked it up and kind of shuffled around online a little bit. And it seemed like there was a consensus that a lot of people considered 10,000 followers to be the benchmark for being an influencer. And then if there's any other levels after that, like maybe you're a super influencer, I don't know where that line is. At the time, there were also certain features on certain social media platforms that unlocked when you hit that mark. So there was a little bit of there was some data behind that.
That's pretty cool. I didn't know that. I didn't know that data locks at certain levels as well.
I personally always thought it was anybody who was cool and had a following on social media.
Yeah.
So you could have, It could be your uncle with 50 followers. If he's putting out content daily and there's people that support him, that's an influencer. And I suppose there's like a looser and a more formal definition you could use. So
Yeah, for sure.
I feel like it's getting free stuff. Did you ever get any free stuff?
that is also true. Yeah. And that's kind of when the question hit me. I have people following me. I have people sending me stuff. I'm like benefiting from this. Is this being an influencer? So that would also be maybe we can add that to the definition. So you have to have 10,000 followers and you have to be getting free stuff.
Well, it leads me to my next question on how social media and then like content itself is evolving and shaping our lives, but more specifically within the rehab professions. Tell me what your thoughts are on that. You have a few bullets here that I'd love you to elaborate on.
Absolutely. I have a lot of opinions on this. I think some of them are more niche and maybe some of them are more debatable, which is, I think, good. But for me, blanket statements, content is the future and will be the driver of innovations in the rehab profession and improving both access and outcomes with care. I think that realization came super early for me. That actually, probably before I even went to school to be in the rehab profession, I was working at a clinic as a tech under some physical therapists, and I would kind of help out with their patients. And at the time, there was this program called VHI. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of it, but VHI was essentially the computer program to print out stick figure drawings for your patients. So you tell your patient to do an exercise, and then you say, we're going to give you a VHI program. And then the tech, AKA me, runs over to the computer, prints out a glorified stick figure of somebody stretching their leg or whatever it is. And then we send you home with it. And I remember doing this over and over and over with patients, and they didn't like it. They weren't interested in it. It was boring. It was paper, which was wasteful. I was like, how is this possible? We have the internet. There's some really cool electric cars I'm seeing on the street. Why are these patients getting printed out stick figures? And it just didn't really hit right. And really shortly after that, luckily, there's a couple companies that started putting out these really cool platforms where there was videos for patients to look at, where they could learn how to move and exercise, learn about their condition and lifestyle management tips. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. And I had a glimpse of it before I went to school, using it a little bit, and people just loved it. One of their favorite parts of coming into the clinic. And it was almost like a homework assignment that they could kind of work on, do it as a project. They'd come in, they get feedback, and then it would get updated. And so I went to school. And then when I got out of school, immediately went straight to that again with all my patients. I was always giving them a program that was put together to try to make it more engaging, more personable, and led by content, which is really important for me, because if people aren't motivated, excited, and represented by the content that's being provided to them, they're just going to tune out. So they need something to be like a consistent thread to pull them through their recovery or their management, whatever it is. And I personally found that to be the most important part of treating patients in my practice. And more importantly, things have changed since then again. So just like the internet came around and then video calls came around, whatever it is, now we have digital health programs. And digital health programs are all about content. Like, yes, they're built around a really great product or an application or a software that people can use. But what's ultimately going to keep them engaging and coming back is what they see and what they're seeing as a result of what they do. So everything down to what words do I see when I first open up this health app, or when I open up this care portal with my doctor, to what model am I seeing in a video that shows me how to exercise? Do they represent me? So all of those things, I think, fall into the content realm. Certainly, if not purely content, the realm where content and product come together to make these digital health programs. But again, as a whole, just seeing how far it's come in the last 10 years and seeing what the trends are with digital health now, I think that content is going to shape the future for a lot of patients and a lot of providers.
What are some things that surprised you once you're elbows deep in content creation on a social media experience? This is looping back into social media. I feel like just everyone is familiar with influencers and you're scrolling your media and it's easy to be the viewer of it. But when you're on the other side, I feel like there's so much you've learned. What can you share with us?
Absolutely. It's interesting. I think when I think about social media, I think about the tip of the iceberg metaphor where a lot of people see that really cool post on their feed and they see the tip. They're like, wow, that person just threw this together and they're so famous. And that is so not fair. Why didn't that happen to me? But I mean, the amount of work that anybody on social media with a following or who is helping people puts into their hustle is staggering. And to think that most of it, most of the time is unpaid is even more staggering. So if you want to, if anyone who's listening is like, maybe I should start an Instagram right now and see how many followers I can get. I mean, if you want to get traction, expect to be working around 10 to 20 hours per week on it, doing something or multiple things every single day to create content, engage with other content, network with people who are also influencers and content creators, work on your brand and your niche and your message and all these things. That's definitely the big one. But on the flip side of that, the really cool thing is it only takes one post or one piece of content to be in a completely different place. It's interesting because it may not necessarily be what you anticipated it to be. It's going to be the thing that people decide they like, and that's completely out of your control. But when it does catch on, you've just potentially helped a lot of people, and you really can get to people and help people, which was a big aha moment for me because that exact thing happened to me when I was on social media. I was doing exactly what I said, working 10 to 20 hours a week on my presence, and I had all these posts that were lined up and getting released several times a week. I was networking with a bunch of really cool people every single day and really just trying my best and trying to get high quality information out to people and trying to help them. And that was the goal. And I had probably posted, I don't know, 100 plus times. And I, had like 1,000 followers, 1,500 followers, something like that. Really, really, really gradual. And then I did another post and I went to bed and I woke up in the morning and I just had so many texts from people. They were like, oh my gosh, I didn't know you were an influencer. Why are you on my TikTok feed right now or my For You page? And I was like, what are they talking about? And then I opened my phone and I was like, oh my gosh, like this one post now, 1 million people have seen it. 2 million people have seen it. I'm getting followers every second. And over the course of like a week, I went to like 20,000 followers, 30,000 followers, going to like towards 50,000 followers. And that was just a really wild moment for me because it was like, well, now people can see all the cool stuff that I already tried to put out for them and they can benefit from it. And I helped them, even though I felt discouraged like 100 times in a row when there was minimal traction. And I think what I learned ultimately from that point onward was that one, it was really gratifying to have that experience. And it added to the fact that I really want to engage people. And it really validated for me that content is a really great way to do that, to get to people, to get their attention, and to get them even started on healthy habits or setting a good example in terms of how they can lead healthier lives.
Yeah. We talk about a lot on the show about impact. I feel like at least every other person who's come on who's taken a non-traditional career journey, a lot of their motivation for moving in a different direction has been wanting to make an impact at a larger scale. And I feel like you've done that. And it must be pretty crazy to be able to reaching people in one ways, because in the clinic, you're able to do that at a one-to-one level through content, through what I do in product management. I get to create awesome products that people get to see. You're reaching people at such a larger fold. It's really cool.
That seemed like a really beautiful metaphor for the listeners who are thinking about going through a transition. You put in the work. You said it took you 100 posts and you kept going. You weren't, oh, I did 2 posts and I didn't get 1 million followers, I'm going to give this up. I was just thinking, oh, there's someone out there who's putting out 100 resumes, 200 messages, whatever it is. And then finally one day you kind of get the break you need. So I thought that was a neat way of looking at it.
It's funny you say that. As somebody who has a lot of people who are considering transitions from the clinic into a non-clinical space, well, I asked them, how many rejections do you have? They give me that number and I say, well, good, we need to get that higher. I consider your first 50 rejections as a benchmark, maybe your first 100 as a badge of honor. Hopefully it doesn't get to that point. But if it does, you're that much closer to that one yes that you've been working so hard for. And I think it reframes the negativity of rejection as a indicator of potential success in the future.
What other lessons have you learned through building content, through social media, through this experience?
I think that this is a little more for the people who are getting more refined with their social media presence. But I would say that in terms of connecting with people and engaging people, which is if you're from healthcare, if you're from rehab, it's really important to you, is that vulnerability really can take you far. I think we all want to be professional and perfect and proper and create a certain image of ourselves. But ultimately, when you act more vulnerable, when you're a little more authentic, people can tell. And if they're getting something valuable from somebody they could think of as imperfect or somebody who could potentially be their friend, they're going to be a lot more motivated to stick around and hear what you have to say. And I think that was really hard for me because initially I wanted to be Mr. Professor and people just didn't like it. People were not interested in it. But when I became that kind of cool guy on your block who just wants to show you how to do a thing or two, it was way easier for people to put a toe in the pool and potentially get interested in other aspects of their health. But on the flip side of that, you just can't sustain it forever. So all this effort of posting every day, trying to maintain a following, trying to be in good standing with the other people who are successful in your space, the burnout is so real. And that's ultimately what happened to me. I enjoyed what I did, but I had to do something new. And luckily I did go on to do something that I'm really passionate about full time. At the time, that was a separate thing from my day to day in the clinic.
I think it is easy to get sucked into like the game of it or putting it out to the, you can it's easy to like lose track of yourself a little bit with that because you are taking in the feedback of others, but at what level do you incorporate that into yourself versus let it go? Yeah, that's tough. I think that's probably the main reason why there's burnout in that industry of social media. It's a tough line to toe for sure. But like, have you learned? I'm still learning it. Any like feedback for listeners on how to better set boundaries?
Totally. I mean, this is different for everybody because it's going to depend on what you tend to, the bad patterns that you tend to fall into with your boundaries or lack thereof. For me, I do really well with time. So temporal constrictions on my work. I'm not looking at anything work related before a certain time. For me, that's about 8 a.m. I'm not looking at anything work related after 6 p.m. I break this rule all the time, but it's there for my mental health. It's there because I have a fiance that I want to spend time with and I want to prioritize. But then I think adding in miniature spaces for healthy habits. So I will have my 20-minute block of time to sit and meditate. I will have my 10-minute block of time to journal. I will actually leave my house for 5 minutes and walk around the block and look at the sun. So things like that, and also exercise, I think make for me a really nice combination of setting boundaries. And I'd love to hear if you guys have any that for me.
Emma, you're a pro at this.
I wouldn't say I'm a pro. I do try though. There's a lot of things I learned in sales training that I wish I had known a long time ago, particularly as a therapist. And one of my favorite, it's this 2-minute video. We can link it to this if you want, by Josh Braun, one of my favorite salespeople. I have it memorized where it's essentially you can't control other people. You can only control what you say and detach from the outcome. A good example is I wasn't on social media at all. I was a complete dinosaur. It was lovely before I got my current role. And now I'm back on it and I'm back into that. Oh, I made this post. How many likes do I have? How many comments do I have? Which is the whole reason I got off social media in the first place. So now just trying not to look. It doesn't matter. Who cares? I get 1 million likes or I get 0. Who cares? I'm detached from that outcome. I'm just putting out what, to Alex's point, things that I hope are helpful for other people. So that's been good. And then more tangibly, I have two phones. I have a work phone and I have a personal phone, and maybe 3 or 4 people at my company know my personal phone, and I try really hard to, kind of similar to Alex, of not looking at it in the morning. Having two phones though is huge. It seems silly, but because some people will say, oh, you can just have two versions of your phone on the same phone. It will turn on and off automatically and blah, blah, blah. But I would just go to that other version of my phone.
Love that.
Yeah. I feel like my approach is similar to yours. I can get like really sucked into something. And like even when I'm doing the podcast or editing, like I can get really sucked into what I'm doing and I look up and like the time's gone. So time boxing that has been really helpful for me because it's been easy. I'm like, oh, I'll just spend an hour on this, and I look up and 3 hours have gone by. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I was supposed to hang out with Phil. And we had to like watch a movie tonight, and I kept pushing it off or something. And so, yeah, I think time boxing it has been very helpful, but I'm still working on it because, and like, I think sometimes it's tough too because like I truly enjoy it when I do have the time, which then I think makes it hard. But then you also have to balance out the long term, it can burn you out. So like, it's a tough balance. I'm still learning it for sure. Okay, so you've learned some stuff in the process from social media. Tell us the things you've learned about yourself in this process.
Yeah, well, in terms of my time on social media, it just really solidified that I had some aspirations, some passions, and some skills that were really important to me, more important than I initially thought, that were ultimately going to lead me to a different lifestyle, to a different job. And I think that's something that I don't know if I want to say I was in denial about for some time, but I just naturally woke up one morning and was like, I'm going to teach people how to do the things that I think are important online, and I'm going to do it with content, and I'm going to try to engage people and get them to be passionate about the world of physical therapy. I just started doing it. And then sure enough, I did that for a while. And then I realized, oh my gosh, I actually like doing this so much more than my day-to-day in the clinic. There were great moments in the clinic and I really do appreciate all the time that I had and all the patients that I've worked with. But it was just so clear to me that it was time for something new. And that really quickly sent me down this spiral of, oh my gosh, there's this amazing community of people who think the same things that I do in the rehab world. And then here we are today. But it was such a learning experience for me because it really awoke something inside of me that I think could have potentially been dormant for a long time.
Yeah. And then I think you were able to tie all that into what you currently do today. Do you think you could give us a little walkthrough of what is your current role and like what does the day-to-day look like for you?
Yeah, I kind of lead a double life. So there's like two heads to this. So I'll kind of start with the first one. So right now I'm a clinical content program manager. That means a lot of stuff, but the big picture is that I am in charge of planning, developing, and curating the content that goes into our digital health programs at the company I work for, and then also guiding the clinical components of those programs to help really all of our teams, but especially our product team, create a really nice digital health experience for the patients that we serve. The day-to-day of that can look like a lot of different things. Internal communication, which is a really fancy way of saying answering emails, messages, whatever it is. And then also the external communication or collaboration part of it, which is actually pretty fun. I work at a health tech company, so I work really closely with other clinical experts who help us create the content that we do and help make sure we're on the right track. Another big part of my job is doing research. There is a part of it that is clinical research. So being up to date with current research, clinical data, and also patient trends, consumer trends. And then there's also some research into technology. On the other side, I do also work closely with some of our clients. We work with a lot of individual clinics and providers, but we also work with a lot of health systems. So it's really important to keep a pulse on what are the pain points for those systems and their chains of clinics. What are they doing really well with, and what do they need help with to make their programs more effective, to help their patients get more, better, faster, whatever it is. And then it's the really fun stuff, which is the content development. And that's a lot of my day as well. So that could be a combination of, there's so much that goes into it, but it could be as simple as creating a list of 10 things that people need to learn about, or 10 movements that somebody with condition X needs to know how to do. But sometimes, and this is my favorite part, it culminates into a shoot. So we actually go into the studio and we actually are getting footage, and we're working with external consultants, other clinicians. We bring in contracted models, and we're getting all this great footage that we ultimately use to create the programs and the content that goes into those programs. So that is always a blast. I feel like Michael Bay on set when we're doing that. And I'm not in front of the camera anymore, thankfully, but it really reminds me of being on social media and going, wow, I really hope a lot of people see this, but it's at a kind of a grander scale. The company I work for has become more product led in the last year. And that's really cool because now we're taking all of this content and we're fusing it with all the really cool things that our product team is doing to create these new digital health programs. So really exciting time to be doing what I'm doing.
I feel like so many listeners are going to be like, I want this job. I'm sitting here and I'm like, I want this job. This is so cool. You get to do so many awesome parts of it. Tell us the other half.
The other half of my dual life is that I run my own content business.
Thanks to everyone for listening to this episode of the Beyond These Clinic Walls podcast. As always, be sure to follow us on LinkedIn and Instagram at Beyond These Clinic Walls for all the latest updates and episode releases. Make sure to join the Clinician Transition group on LinkedIn and Slack to be part of the networking community for like-minded rehab professionals. Questions, comments, concerns, or do you know someone who might make an excellent guest on our next show? Reach out to us at beyondtheseclinicwalls@gmail.com. And as always, thanks so much for listening.